Alright, my ghost eaglets, we have yet another deck profile. Pulling some magic out of my hat this time. Eat your heart out, David Copperfield. And you too, Penn and Tellarknights, baby! Got a few requests from Tellarknights, so here I am. Granted, it's mostly just one person, but I keep my promises. Tellarknights are an Exceed deck that centers around level 4 light warrior type monsters, with more of a control element than other Exceed decks. So like usual, I'll go over the main deck, the extra deck, then the skill, and then how the cereal tastes when you combine Cinnamon Toast Crunch with the Yoo-Hoo Chaser. Getting right into it, Tellarknight NEB has the effect on a hard once per turn that when he's summoned in any capacity, you can add any Tellarknight monster from your deck to your hand. An excellent search effect. Like every other main deck monster that I'm running in my build and most other builds that you'll find, he's level 4, light attribute, and a warrior type. He is an ultra rare in Shining Hope, unfortunately, because he is an integral part of the deck, making a free-to-play version of Tellarknights fairly challenging, but he is viable at 2 copies, and I will go over some free-to-play alternatives after the profile. I'm running 2, I do not have my 3rd copy, but there are successful builds running either 2 or 3, and I've found it to be still viable with 2. Next up, we have Tellarknight Altair. His effect is also a hard once per turn. When he's summoned in any capacity, you can target a Tellarknight monster in your graveyard except himself, and special summon it in defense mode. Then he prevents you from attacking with any monster outside of the archetype for the rest of the turn, which more often than not won't matter, which will make more sense when we go over the extra deck. Similar to NEB, but instead of searching, he has a phenomenal recursion effect that, when resolved uninterrupted, is an instant rank 4, which is really good for this deck's intensive purposes and in general, really. He's a super rare in Shining Hope, the same box as NEB. I'm running 3 of him, and unlike NEB, Altair is very consistently run at 3 copies. Tellarknight Kukulele is a English Major's Nightmare with the effect that when he's summoned, you can send any card from the archetype from your deck to the graveyard, making him an archetypal specific Foolish Burial, a very strong card that we don't have in Duel Links and is limited to 1 in the TCG and has been ever since Konami decided that the graveyard was no longer a place to die, but more like a rave that you can usually leave when you feel like it, or when you've had too much because Santa Claus was buying the rounds. I think you can see immediately that he can be paired with Altair very nicely for rank 4 plays, but will also pair well with one of the extra deck monsters. I'm running him at 1 copy, and that's another constant that you'll see. If the deck was quicker, he would be a lot better, but simply because of the deck's pace, more than 1 copy can be really bricky. And because of a card I'll talk about later, he can be brought out directly from the deck, making his situational effect more accessible in the situation that you need him. He is a rare in Shining Hope. Tellarknight Vega can special summon another Tellarknight monster from your hand when he's summoned in any way, also a hard once per turn on that effect. He's another instant rank 4 if you have the right cards, but like the ukulele, he's situational. So I'm running 1, running 2 is debatable, but you'll pair him more with that mysterious hunk of quick play spell card that I'm going to talk about. Vega is another rare in Shining Hope. Nah, not today, Helena Boham Carter. Tellarknight Sirius is here to stay, and he is serious. The man to put the marbles back in the sack. The man cutting everybody off at that graveyard rave and cuffing Santa Claus. Hard once per turn when he's summoned, he can target 5 Tellarknight monsters in your graveyard and shuffle them all into the deck, and then you get to draw a card. Built-in archetypal Jar of Avarice, great recursion effect, and only a normal from Shining Hope. Solid boy. 1 copy is he is the most situational of the bunch, but once again will be paired nicely with Tellarknight Skybridge, baby. Tellarknight Skybridge is a quick play spell card that on a hard once per turn can target a Tellarknight monster you control, then special summons a Tellarknight monster from your deck with a different name than the target, however the target is then shuffled into the deck. And while that Tellarknight monster summoned by Skybridge's effect is on the field, you cannot special summon any monsters outside of the archetype. A free-to-play card that you can get 3 copies of by leveling up Tory Meadows. The card is really good in the archetype, basically acts as a table of contents for your deck and those pesky situational effects. It can pull out Sirius later in the duel when you need to get that greed. It can pull out Vega when you have another Tellarknight in your hand, or Altair when you have one in the rave. Alright, that's enough rave jokes. I'm sorry. not really. It can also be used in the battle phase to finish out games since it is a quick play, kind of how people use Mask Change or Swallow's Nest. And all around great card for the archetype. Now, running 2 or 3, it's really debatable. Like, I mean, 57% of the time it's run at 3 copies and 43% of the time it's run at 2. It's successful either way, it works either way, and honestly, it really does come down to preference. Personally, I'm running 3, but that can occasionally be bricky, but at 3 copies, the card is so phenomenal for the deck. But that brickiness, because of the fact that we're not running too many monster cards, can hurt from time to time. As for other spell cards, it's very splashable. I'm running Book of Moon because Book of Moon. 2 copies here, but realistically, a card like Enemy Controller would work just fine. Spell and trap removal, things like Lightning Vortex or Offerings to the Doom can be teched. A lot of different options for the staples you run to fill out the deck more. Like I said earlier, this deck does like to control and protect, so something like Enemy Controller will fit in better than something like Lightning Vortex, but the deck is still palatable and moldable in a lot of different ways when it comes to staples. Stellar Nova Alpha is an archetypal counter trap card that is an Omni Negate. I use that term for Infernity Barrier in my Infernity deck profile, and basically it describes a card that can negate almost everything. It's not once per turn on this card. When a spell or trap or monster effect is activated, you can send one face-up Tellarknight monster you control to the graveyard to negate that effect and destroy the card. Then you get to draw. It being a counter trap means it's spell speed 3. In other words, your opponent cannot respond to this card. One of the strongest cards in the deck for sure, a phenomenal turn 1 play. Timed right, it can win you the game, negating Soprano's effect against Melodious or Deep Sea Diva against Water Exceed, for example. And that drawing a card is a nice little cherry on top for losing that Tellarknight that you had, but then you could get it back with Altair, all the while putting your opponent in a pinch. Yeah, putting your opponent in a pinch. That hurt my tongue. This card is another super rare in Shining Hope. Now regarding the rest of the trap cards in the deck, it's a similar situation to the spell cards, more control-oriented staples like Fiendish Chain, Paleozoic Canadia, and Floodgate Trap Hole, which is an outstanding trap card in this meta, and it's only getting stronger. Basically, you're debilitating your opponent until your combos pop off and you can push for game. Outside of the disruptive boys, a lot of Tellarknight decks are running Oasis of Dragon Souls at a copy or 2. Oasis is a continuous trap card that can target a monster in your graveyard and special summon it in defense mode. It becomes worm type, and when it leaves the field, Oasis is destroyed and vice versa. When you summon the Tellarknight from the graveyard with this, you are proccing their effect at the same time, and you are also setting up Exceed plays by extension. Now, it's likely this card will be power crept in Tellarknights when Monster Reborn hits the red carpet, but like most things, Tellarknights are gonna love having a copy of Monster Reborn. I give it 3 weeks. I give it 3 weeks before it's banned. I'm kidding. Don't put me on the record. Oasis is a super rare in Pendulum Genesis, a great card for the archetype, even though it is a slower card, even slower than their pace, but it does fit into them by extension of that. Moving on to the extra deck, I am running 2 copies of a couple of archetypal rank 4s in Dark Tellarknight Batlamus and Stellar Knight Deltaros. Batlamus is the only example of a dark attribute Tellarknight in Duel Links. He requires 2 level 4 Tellarknight monsters and changes the attribute of all face-up monsters to dark while he's on the field, but we don't care. Then his other effect is why he's really used. You can detach 1 Exceed material from him and discard a card to special summon a light archetypal Exceed monster from your extra deck using himself and his remaining materials as materials for this new Exceed monster. And something to note, this special summon is treated as an Exceed summon, so there's no weird ruling nightmares with that. And another thing, but this is not going to happen, but this effect becomes a quick effect if you have 7 or more Tellarknight monsters with different names in your rave. 7 different named Tellarknights is like the max that we're running anyway, you know, in these current builds, and you wouldn't really want to use this on your opponent's turn anyway with the current state of Tellarknights and Duel Links. Nah, you're using this for the front man, the point, the main event, spotlights and all, Stellar Knight Deltaros. And just real quick, Batlamus is not in Shining Hope. Unfortunately, he's an ultra rare in Infinite Ray because Konami. Deltaros requires 3 level 4 monsters for a regular Exceed summon, and like, nah, bruh, I ain't doing all that, and that's why we're using Batlamus to go into him. While he has an Exceed material, your opponent cannot activate any cards or effects in response to your normal or special summons, clearing the way for your other Tellarknight monsters to resolve their effects. And it also works on himself, so no Floodgate, no Void, no Stern Lecture from god. Then on a soft once per turn, you can detach and exceed material from him to target and destroy any card on the field. Then, if he's sent from the field to the Rave, you can special summon any archetypal monster from your deck or hand. This effect is not once per turn and is really strong. Deltaros is a phenomenal card all the way around. His floating effect is so good, and we all know the power of Vermilion Dragon Mech simply because he's easy to go into and can pop a card on the field. The same criteria goes for Deltaros within his archetype. But another thing that does hurt is the whole free-to-play aspect. He is also an ultra rare and Shining Hope like NEB, but he is certainly viable at one copy if need be. And the thing about that floating effect, it not being once per turn, is kind of crazy because you can cycle through with multiple things multiple times if you find ways to abuse that effect. Other rank 4s we are running is the premier poster boy rank 4 Malevolent Sin, debatably the best extra deck monster in Duel Links history in terms of straight viable consistency. Detaching a material to banish a monster will never not be good. Then I'm running Diamond Dire, another staple, but realistically, Dweller, Roach, Samurai, Kachikochi Dragon, in any generic rank 4 can work here. And then lastly, there's Star Liege, Paladynamo. Taking advantage of the light attribute thing because he does require 2 level 4 light monsters, preventing him from being the staple that he would be if he was completely generic. Soft once per turn, but realistically once per this card's on the field, you can detach 2 exceed materials from him to target an opponent's monster, and then its attack becomes 0 and then its effects are negated. Then if this card is destroyed by an opponent's card, either battle or card effect, then you get to draw a card. That first effect is really good and can deal with Bloom Diva, Cyber Slash, Dreadmaster, etc. It's a very good card for dealing with problematic boss monsters on turn 2, 3, or 4. I'm running him at 1 copy, which is pretty standard, and sadly he is another soft lock ultra rare in Selection Box 4 and Darkness Gimmick main box, but again only 1 copy and he can be substituted by anything. Whew, so let's get into some combos. Most of the Tellarknights pair well going first with Skybridge, so if you open NEB and Skybridge, you can normal summon NEB and search Altair, then using Skybridge, shuffle NEB back into the deck, and then it should be noted that this recursion is why 2 NEB is usually fine. Then special summon the Kukulele, which will send a Tellarknight to the Rave. From here, you can set your back row and pass. By your next turn, you should have a material for Altair on his summon, which will end on a Deltaros, which can start popping cards and start putting you in a state of advantage. Deltaros isn't the best turn 1 play because you can't use his destruction effect yet, but on the flip, his floating effect is really good for searching out what you'll need for a turn 3 push. Cards like Nova are optimal for turn 1 as well, and a lot of these cards help you draw and cycle through your deck, which is another reason we get away with running fewer monster cards. Which is why the skill we are using is Destiny Draw. You take 1800 points of damage, then your next draw phase you can add any card from your deck to your hand instead of your normal draw. Notorious skill, definitely overpowered, needs to be nerfed, I don't like it, but helps this deck cycling consistency. Deltaros' floating effect is great to summon Sirius because at that point you should have at least 5 Tellarknights in your graveyard if you brought out Deltaros in the normal way, because that 5th one is going to be coming from Batlamus's discard cost. And then this lets you recover all your pieces, including your extra deck monsters, and draw. Opening Vega with any other Tellarknight is a Deltaros, of course, but generally you'll want to save these combos for turn 2 and onward. Going first is one of this deck's weak points, but because of Nova and cards like Floodgate and Chain, it's very possible to survive and then end up disrupting with Deltaros the next turn to finish the job. NEB Pass with back row is a common play here. Deltaros has 2500 attack, and NEB, Altair, the Kukulele, and Sirius all have 1500 plus. And that is your gateway to lethal. It's really quite simple actually. Control until Deltaros can clean up, turn off the lights, lock the door, and call it a fucking day. I recommend having awareness of the cards in your hand while playing this deck so you don't slip up with Batlamus's effect, and also aware of how many Tellarknights you have, where they are, and when. Helps make the combos more seamless and obvious. How strong is this deck? Well, it's definitely hurting for some more support, but overall it's not a bad deck. If I'm being honest, I'm not the biggest fan of its control nature, but it does do something cool with that. However, it does leave the deck feeling a little flat and rudimentary. It's rare for Sin or even Paladynamo to hit the field because the deck could be renamed to let's go get Deltaros on the field and win. Doesn't have a lot of diversity to it. However, it is neat enough what the Tellarknights do too. I like that they complement each other very well, and that artwork slaps. But yeah, it really does need a lot of help, but I am comfortable saying it's a good deck, and I can't say heads or tails on recommending it, but if it piques your interest, then go for it. It will compete for you, and its potential can only go up with future releases. Okay, so some free-to-play alternatives. I already mentioned the rank 4s you can substitute, but you do need a copy of Deltaros. It really just doesn't work without him, and by extension, a copy of Batlamus. It kills me to say that, but it's just kind of how it is. Batlamus is the real sucker here since Deltaros is in the box that the rest of them are in at the very least. Some builds use Kiteroid for that turn 1, definitely an option. Spell and trap removal is run commonly for more offensive angled builds, and pairing that with Kiteroid helps with that even more. There are free-to-play options for spell and trap removal, or if you have any copies of MST, Cosmic Cyclone, Night Beam, Galaxy Cyclone, etc., it's easier for me to believe that people would have a copy or two of these cards since they are as widespread as a type of card can get. Stellar Nova Wave is a free-to-play continuous trap that can special summon a Tellarknight during your main phase or your opponent's battle phase. It's slow, but underrated in my eyes. Using it at the end of your opponent's battle phase is nice for summoning the Kukulele to pitch a NEB, which you could summon with Altair for the next turn. So Tellarknight Procyon can send a Tellarknight from your hand to the Rave to draw a card. Paired with Altair, this card can be straight advantage. It's a normal in Shining Hope, making it very easy to obtain. And then free-to-play control cards like Rainbow Life are fine. There are many options to create a palatable, but maybe not quite yet viable version of the deck. But again, there are options, and whether or not it's future-proof depends on the releases that we will likely inevitably get. It just kind of depends on when we get them and if those cards will be able to be viable by the time they're released. So that was my deck profile and explanation for Tellarknights. I hope it was helpful or informative in some way. I hope you got your fix, JucingKawa. I finally did it. I thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next rave.